Hello and welcome back to the Tik-A Tee Method YouTube channel. My name is Ron Castingway, longtime educator, composer, author, conductor, clinician, and performer. So glad you're joining me today. We're going to be working on week 7 or chapter 7 from my book, Rhythmic Sight-Reading, the Tik-A Tee Method. And this is the point of the book where we begin to think about small rhythmic motifs or small rhythmic patterns like musical sight words. Music is a language. It should be taught like a language. And we talk about this beginning in this chapter and moving forward in my book. We're also going to be talking about how a single eighth note can be paired with 2 16th notes, and vice versa, how 2 16th notes can be paired with a single eighth note by use of the beam. So I hope you'll stick around for the whole video. We'll do a couple exercises together. We'll learn something about musical sight words and a couple of different rhythmic motifs. Let's go do this. All right, here we are in week 7. So what do I mean by musical sight words? Well, when we were in kindergarten, for example, learning the English language, we had these smaller words called sight words, like that, with, what, he, she, her, his. As soon as we saw these words on the page, we instantly knew what they sounded like without having to phonetically sound them out. Well, in music, we have the same thing. And if we can think about these small rhythm patterns as musical sight words, we'll begin to better comprehend music and understand it in the same way that we learned our own language. And that's what I begin to talk about here in week 7 or chapter 7 from my book. And as you'll see at the top of the page here, we have 2 musical sight words in this chapter. We have an eighth note beamed to 2 16th notes and 2 16th notes beamed to a single eighth note. When professional musicians see these 2 musical motifs appear in common time, they instantly know what they sound like and they can move on to the next musical sight word or musical phrase. So that's what I'm talking about when I say musical sight word, and we'll talk more about it here. But right now, let's dive into these 2 rhythm patterns and talk a little bit more about those. We know that in common time, 2 beamed eighth notes take up a single beat. It sounds like this: T, T. If I had a full measure of eighth notes, T, 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 T. We also know that 4 16th notes takes up a single beat in common time. Tik-A, Tik-A. If I had a full measure of 16th notes, Tik-A, 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 Tik-A. We also know that a single eighth note takes up a half of a beat, and 2 16th notes takes up a half a beat. You probably see where I'm going with this, and if you look at the pattern on the left at the top of the page, you'll see that I've taken an eighth note, half of a beat, and beamed it to 2 16th notes, another half of a beat. And this is a musical pattern that I would like you to begin to think of as a musical sight word. This rhythmic motif, you should instantly know what it sounds like when you see it in the music. And here is what it sounds like. T, Tik-A. And if I had 4 of them in a row, taking up an entire measure in common time, T, Tik-A, T, Tik-A, T, Tik-A, T, Tik-A. It's a very simple pattern. And you shouldn't have to phonetically, per se, sound it out when you see it. That's the whole idea of instantly knowing what it sounds like in common time when you see it. And we think of it as a musical sight word. So that's where we have the single eighth note beamed to 2 16th notes. Conversely, we can take that rhythmic pattern and swap it or reverse it. In other words, take the 2 16th notes and put them first, and then beam those to a single eighth note. This is the pattern at the right-hand side at the top of the page, and it sounds like this. Tik-A Tee. And if I had a full measure of them in 4/4 time, Tik-A Tee, Tik-A Tee, Tik-A Tee, Tik-A Tee. Okay, so another simple rhythmic pattern, and this is why I want you to start thinking about these as musical sight words. Once you do, you'll begin to feel your improvement of sight reading exponentially improve. This is how the professionals are doing it. This is how they sight read music so quickly. They see these rhythm patterns and they know instantly what they sound like. They can be looking 1, 2, 3 beats ahead. They can be looking 1 or 2 measures ahead in some cases. And this is our ultimate goal as sight readers and the whole intention behind my book. Learn music like we learned our language and improve our sight reading skills when it comes to rhythm. The diagram at the bottom of the page is just a visual representation of how we derive these 2 rhythm patterns from a grouping of 4/16 notes. And we know 4/16 notes takes up a single beat in common time. So let's take a look at the one on the left first. We have 4/16 notes. We know that these 4/16 notes take up 1 beat in common time. If I take the first 2/16 notes of that grouping, which is a half a beat, and I combine them together into a single 8th note, that's how we begin to get our first motif. So we bring this 8th note down into our pattern. Then we take the second 2/16 notes, I'm circling them here, and we just bring those all the way down and we keep them into our rhythm pattern. That's where we get T, Tik-A. Okay, now it's important to note, if I was to draw this, I have my 3 note heads, my 3 stems, I've got my single beam connecting them, then I've got 2 beams for my 16th notes. It's important to remember that an 8th note will always be 1 beam, and a 16th note will always be 2 beams. So that's how we can see right away that it's an 8th note and then 2 16th notes. Now let's look at the right-hand side of the diagram. Same thing. We've got 4/16 notes that take up 1 beat in common time. But instead of taking the first 2/16 notes and bringing those down into an 8th note, I'm going to take the last 2/16 notes and combine those into a single 8th note, both of which get a half a beat, right? A single 8th note is a half a beat, 2/16 notes is a half a beat. And I'm going to bring that down into my rhythm pattern, okay? Therefore, the first 2/16 notes, the ones that I'm circling, will come directly down into our rhythm pattern. So we've got 2/16 notes now, followed by an 8th note. And again, just to keep in mind, when we draw this, I've got my 3 note heads, my 3 stems, a single beam, but because I want my 16th notes to be first, the 2 beams will happen on the first 2 notes, okay? So we've got 2/16 notes to a single 8th note. So, as you've probably figured out by now, math and rhythm really do go hand in hand. There is a lot of math in rhythm, and that's okay. That's why these diagrams can prove to be helpful to figure out how we derive these 2 rhythmic patterns from 1 beat in common time. But now that we've broken it down for you, and you know T, Tik-A Tee, Tik-A Tik-A Tee, Tik-A Tee, T, Tik-A Tee, Tik-A Tik-A Tee, Tik-A Tee. Every time that you see that, you don't need to phonetically sound it out anymore. You can now see this pattern as a musical sight word, and you know how to say it using the verbiage from the Tik-A Tee method, which is very simply incorporated into these 2 patterns. There's not too much to think about. An 8th note is always T, 2/16 notes is Tik-A. Very simple. So when we see these in our music notation, in our music, we can just read it and move on to the next musical sight word that we see. So what do we do now? We go to the practice exercises. We're going to do 2 together today. Let's go. Okay, let's analyze exercise 7A. The first thing I want to do is see how many times one of our new rhythm patterns appears in this exercise. So I'm going to go in and circle all of my T Tik-A patterns and my Tik-A Tee patterns and see how many times they actually occur. You'll also notice in exercise 7A that I've included all the Tik-A Tee verbiage just for a little added assistance. So let's dive right in here. So in measure 1, I can see I've got one of my patterns right away on beat 1, Tik-A Tee. All right, and then later in that measure, I've got another one, the same exact thing on beat 4, another Tik-A Tee. Measure 2 doesn't look like I have any of my patterns from this week. Measure 3, here I have it right here. The 8th note's first this time, T Tik-A. Measure 4, no new rhythm patterns. Going down to the next line, measure 5, no new rhythm pattern there. Measure 6, beat 1, I've got an 8th note beamed to 2 16th notes, and then on beat 3, reversed 2 16th notes to a single 8th note. Measure 7, none of my new rhythm patterns there. Then in measure 8 on beat 1, T Tik-A, on beat 2 reversed, Tik-A Tee. So in exercise 7A, I was able to recognize these musical sight words, these new rhythm patterns right away. Were you? So how many do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times we've got one of our new rhythm patterns. And if we can recognize these as musical sight words and we know how they sound right away, then we're on the path to being exceptional sight readers, and that is the goal. So what I'm going to do right now is erase all of this ink, and I'm just going to go in measure by measure, beat by beat, and analyze this exercise before we perform it. Okay, measure 1, beat 1. We've got one of our 2 new rhythms, right? Tik-A Tee. Then we have 2 beats of silence with 2 quarter rests on beats 2 and 3 in the middle of that measure before we get to beat 4 with another Tik-A Tee. The second measure has a half rest. We know that a half rest takes up 2 beats of silence. Now, beats 3 and 4, really important. This is the dotted quarter note, eighth note rhythm that we went over in great detail in video 6, in week 6 from my book. So if you haven't checked out that video, go check it out now. The dotted quarter note, eighth note rhythm can sometimes be confusing to new students because it creates a little bit of eighth note syncopation. It always sounds like this in common time. Ta, ti. So this quarter note is the downbeat of 3. You can think of this dot, as I explained in the video, as beat 4. And then this eighth note is the upbeat of 4. Great way to be thinking about the dotted quarter note, eighth note rhythm, which instead of a 1-beat musical sight word, should be looked at as a 2-beat musical sight word, since we know it's going to sound the same all the time in common time. Moving on to measure 3, we've got one of our new patterns, T Tik-A. Then beat 2, a quarter note, and then we have another half rest, so 2 beats of silence here on beats 3 and 4. Moving to the fourth measure, nice easy measure, T, T, Ta, Ta. Beats 3 and 4 have that half note, which afford us that opportunity to be looking ahead to the next line while we're saying that half note. Remember, looking ahead in sight reading is one of the most important things we can do to improve. But when we're switching lines, it's even more important. Moving on to measure 5, or the first measure in the second line, we can see right away that we've got our dotted quarter note, eighth note rhythm from week 6. Here it is on beats 1 and 2. The way we think about this is the dotted quarter note comes in on 1. We think of this dot as beat 2 and this eighth note as the upbeat of 2. It really is a great way to think about this 2-beat musical sight word if you're just starting out reading rhythms. Moving on, beat 3 has a quarter note and beat 4 is a quarter rest. So we'll have a little bit of silence before moving on to measure 6, where we have T Tik-A. Then on beat 2, a rest, and then we reverse the first beat's rhythm. We swap it for Tik-A Tee on beat 3. Then another quarter rest on beat 4. Measure 7, we have a half note taking up beats 1 and 2. We hold that out full value, so we might want to write -3 here to make sure we hold that note out full value. Then we've got a half rest here on beats 3 and 4, so we'll have 2 beats of silence. The last measure, we have T Tik-A, and then reversed on beat 2, Tik-A Tee. And then we end with a half note here on beats 3 and 4. And I would tell my students to write -1 here to make sure we're holding that out full value. Ta. Okay, so now that we've thoroughly analyzed this exercise, it's time to go perform it. So I hope you'll join me. Let's go do that right now. All right, we're going to perform exercise 7A together. You'll notice that I've got yet another new metronome for us today. This one comes to us from violinlounge.com, so thank you to the folks at that website for offering up a free metronome. It is really important that you find a metronome that works for you. I'm always experimenting because I like to find new ones, but you cannot do these exercises unless you're doing them with a metronome. Very important. Okay, so today we're going to be at 74 beats per minute, or the quarter note equals 74, and I'm going to be singing a G3. You can sing an octave higher, octave lower, or a totally different note altogether, but I hope that you will do the exercise with me. I'll count us off, and then we'll sing together. 1, 2, ready, and Tik-A Tee. Tik-A Tee, ta, tee, tee, Tik-A ta, tee, tee, ta, 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 tee, ta, tee, Tik-A, Tik-A Tee, ta, tee, Tik-A, Tik-A Tee, ta. Stop the metronome. You'll notice I held those two half notes out full value. That's what you should be doing as well. We had 7 examples of our new rhythm pattern from week 7 in there. Pretty cool stuff. So if you're working alone, if you're in a practice room doing these exercises, how do you know if you did it right or wrong? You go and you check it against the MP3s that are included with my book. So we're going to go do that right now and see if we did it right. Okay, here we are at my website on the page that has all 363 MP3s that accompany the exercises in my book. I wanted to share one new development with you guys. As you scroll down, you will see that now I have the YouTube links for the educational videos that accompany the MP3. So to the left-hand side, this play button and these fast-forward buttons down here are to play the MP3s. And if you want to watch the video that accompanies that week, you have a direct link now to the YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed already, I do hope that you will subscribe today. As you scroll down, you will see all of the weeks that are available to you, and we're going to scroll down, of course, to week 7, which is scheduled to be released on Tuesday, January 21st, 2025, as part of the Tik-A Tee Tuesdays video series. So if you're watching this, it is at least January 21st or later. Thank you for joining us. We are now going to look at exercise 7A here, and you have one of 3 options. You can just listen to the MP3 and check your work that way. Number 2, you can sing along with the MP3 and vocalize the rhythms once again to the MP3. Or number 3, you can break out your instrument and play along with the MP3. So without further ado, here is exercise 7A. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tik-A Tee, Tik-A Tee, ta, tee, tee, Tik-A ta, tee, tee, ta, 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 tee, ta, tee, Tik-A, Tik-A Tee, ta, tee, Tik-A, Tik-A Tee, ta. And there you have it, exercise 7A. So now, if your instrument is not the voice and you play another instrument, that's the crucial third step here. So first, we take some time to analyze an exercise, then we perform it, then we listen and check along with the MP3, but the final and most important step is to perform these exercises on your instrument. Today I'm going to do a little bit something different. My vocal ensemble here at the school I teach at in Connecticut agreed to sight read exercise 7A and 7B and be videotaped doing it. So I'm going to show you live action here, real high school students using the Tik-A Tee method to sight read. So this is them sight reading exercise 7A. 1, 2, ready, and
Tik-A Tee, Tik-A Tee, ta, tee, tee, Tik-A ta, tee, tee, ta, 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 tee, ta, tee, Tik-A, Tik-A Tee, ta, tee, Tik-A, Tik-A Tee, ta.
All right, let's dive into the next exercise, exercise 7B. The first thing I'm going to do is once again circle all of our new rhythm patterns for week 7. So the T-Tik-As and the Tik-A Tees. Let's go in and find them now. Measure 1, I see one right here. Measure 2, we've got one. Measure 3, we've got one. And measure 5, the first measure in the second line, we've got 2 of them. Measure 6, we've got 2 of them there. Measure 7, we've got 2 of them there. Measure 8, we've got 1 there. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 examples of one of the 2 rhythm patterns for week 7. So we know that we're going to have a bunch to work on here, and we're going to go through this exercise like I did 7A and just go through each measure and each beat so that we can really be clear on what's happening in each measure. So let me clear the ink and we'll go do that right now. All right, let's clear this ink out and talk about each measure here. Okay, so in the first measure on our first beat, we have T, Tik-A, right? One of our 2 rhythm patterns. Then we have beat 2, Ta. Beats 3 and 4 will be this half note. We want to hold that out full value to beat 1 of the next measure, which is a Ta, Ti, Ti, Ta, and then T, Tik-A, right? 8th note, 2/16, one of our rhythm patterns from week 7. Measure 3, Ta, Ta, rest, beat 4, Tik-A Tee. So swap the 2/16 notes and then the 8th note. And then in our 4th measure here, we have our dotted quarter note 8th note rhythm, that 2-beat musical sight word. So beat 1, and then we can think of that dot as beat 2, and this 8th note as the upbeat of beat 2. And then we have beats 3 and 4 on this half note, which accommodate us to look ahead while that half note's happening, because we now have to switch lines. All right, so looking at the first measure on the second line, also known as measure 5, we notice that we have 2 consecutive T, Tik-A rhythms, okay? So beat 1, T, Tik-A, and beat 2, T, Tik-A. And then it's finished off with a half note on beats 3 and 4. Measure 6, now we have 2 consecutive Tik-A Tees on beats 1 and beat 2. Closed off with another half note on beats 3 and 4. And then in measure 7, we have T, Tik-A, Tik-A Tee, and then another half note on beats 3 and 4. And in the last measure, the 8th measure, we've got a Ta on beat 1, and then we have T, Tik-A on beat 2, with our half note happening again on beats 3 and 4 in the final measure. And we want to write -1 here so we know to hold that full value. Ta, release. Okay, really important that we hold notes full value when we're sight reading and performing. So we've analyzed exercise 7B. Now is the time we need to go perform it. I hope you'll join me. Let's go and perform it together right now. For exercise 7B, I think I'm actually going to delete all of this blue ink. I think there's enough going on in this exercise. I don't want it to be any more confusing, so hopefully that clears it up just a little bit for you so you can see the exercise a little better. We're going to keep it at 74 beats per minute on the metronome, or the quarter note equals 74. Here is the G3. You can sing this exact pitch an octave higher, an octave lower, or a different pitch altogether, but I do hope you'll join me in vocalizing the rhythms for exercise 7B. Okay, here we go. 1, 2, ready, and T, Tik-A, Ta, 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 T, T, Ta, T, Tik-A, Ta, Ta. Tik-A Tee, Ta, Tee, Ta, Tee, Tik-A Tee, Tik-A, Ta, Tik-A Tee, Tik-A Tee, Ta, Tee, Tik-A, Tik-A Tee, Ta, Ta, Tee, Tik-A, Ta. All right, and I held that half note out, full value at the end. I think we got all 10 of our rhythm patterns from week 7, but I don't know. How do we check? We go and listen to the MP3. You can choose to perform along with the MP3 or just listen to it, but we're going to go check it right now to see if we did it right or if we made any errors. Let's go. Okay, here we are at the MP3s. We're going to listen to exercise 7B. Are you going to just listen along? Are you going to sing along and vocalize the rhythms with the MP3? Or are you going to play along on your instrument that isn't the voice? The choice is yours. Here we go with exercise 7B. One, 2, 3, 4. Tee, Tik-A, Ta, 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 Tee, Tee, Ta, Tee, Tik-A, Ta, Ta, Tik-A Tee, Ta, Tee, Ta, Tee, Tik-A Tee, Tik-A, Ta, Tik-A Tee, Tik-A Tee, Ta. Tik-A Tee, ta, ta, tee, Tik-A ta. And there you have it. Okay, and now, if I asked you the question, what's the final step in this process? You would loudly answer, I need to play it on my instrument, especially if my instrument is not the voice. Okay, so as my vocal ensemble performed exercise 7A, they also agreed to perform exercise 7B. So I'm going to show you them sight reading, again, high school students using the Tik-A Tee method to sight read rhythms. So here they are performing exercise 7B. 1, 2, ready, and...
Tee, Tik-A ta, 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 tee, tee, ta, tee, Tik-A ta, ta, Tik-A tee, ta, tee, ta, tee, Tik-A tee, Tik-A ta, Tik-A tee, Tik-A tee, ta, tee, Tik-A, Tik-A tee, ta, ta, tee, Tik-A ta.
All right, that does it for week 7. Thank you so much for joining me in today's video. I hope you had some fun. I hope you did the 2 exercises along with me, and I hope you now know our 2 new rhythmic motifs or rhythm patterns, or better yet, our 1-beat musical sight word. We have tee, Tik-A, and Tik-A tee. Music is a language. It should be taught like a language. And way back in kindergarten, when we were learning sight words, that's how we're going to relate reading rhythm patterns. We have 1-beat musical sight words and 2-beat musical sight words. Last week in week 6, we had a 2-beat musical sight word. Ta, tee, right? Our dotted quarter note to 8th note. That's a 2-beat musical sight word. The 2 patterns in week 7 this week were just 1-beat musical sight words. And I promise, if you begin to think of sight reading and reading rhythms like this, your abilities to sight read will skyrocket. I do hope you'll check out my book, Rhythmic Sight-Reading, the Tik-A Tee Method. It's available at my website, roncastonguay.com. It's also available on Amazon and at jwpepper.com. And please check out my store on Amazon, Ron Castonguay Music. Some great resources there for music educators and students alike. And if you haven't done so already, please hit that like and subscribe button and that notification bell so you get the latest video. Thank you again for making it all the way to the end of this video. I appreciate your support, and I will see you in week 8.